National Electrical Code Section 110.26 addresses spaces about electrical equipment. This section ensures sufficient access and working space for the safe operation and maintenance of electrical equipment. However, specific exceptions can alter the application of these rules. In the situation described, the question concerns installing a 6/6 metal wireway behind industrial warehouse-style open-back shelving. The wireway serves as a pathway for taps from a feeder to disconnects located outside the building. The primary concern revolves around whether this installation violates the accessibility requirements outlined in 110.26. To determine compliance, it is crucial to analyze both 110.26 and 110.26b, along with any applicable exceptions. Section 110.26 mandates that electrical equipment must be accessible to allow for maintenance, servicing, adjustment, and examination. This requirement aims to ensure that qualified personnel can safely and effectively perform necessary tasks on electrical systems. However, an exception exists within 110.26a. This exception states that equipment does not need to be readily accessible if it is unlikely to require maintenance or service. This exception is particularly relevant in scenarios where certain electrical components are designed for long-term reliability and are not expected to need frequent attention. In the described installation, the taps from the feeder to the disconnects outside the building fall under this exception. These taps, once properly installed and connected, are generally considered unlikely to require regular maintenance or servicing. Consequently, according to the exception in 110.26a, the wireway housing these taps does not necessarily need to be readily accessible for maintenance purposes. Now let's consider 110.26b, which focuses on the arrangement of electrical equipment within a space. This section stipulates that equipment must be located in a manner that does not impede the safe operation or maintenance of other equipment. The intention is to prevent situations where the placement of one piece of equipment hinders access to or safe operation of another. In the context of the wireway installation, the wireway is positioned behind open-back shelving, maintaining approximately 2 feet of clearance from the front of the wireway to the back of the shelf. This arrangement is considered to provide sufficient access for the safe operation and maintenance of other equipment in the area. The open-back shelving design allows for reasonable access to the wireway, even though it is not directly exposed. Given the application of the exception in 110.26 and the adequate access provided by the shelving arrangement under 110.26b, the installation of the 6/6 metal wireway behind the industrial warehouse-style open-back shelving is not in violation of 110.26. It is important to document and justify the decision that the taps are unlikely to require maintenance or service. This documentation can be useful during inspections or future evaluations of the electrical system. Factors to consider in this justification include the quality of the materials used for the taps, the environmental conditions in which the wireway is located, and the design of the electrical system, which may incorporate redundancy or protective measures to minimize the likelihood of failures. While the installation is compliant with 110.26 based on the provided information, always consult with a qualified electrical inspector or engineer to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations in Indianapolis, Indiana. Local amendments or interpretations of the NEC may exist, and a professional can provide definitive guidance based on the specific details of the installation and the local regulatory environment. The decision to install the wireway in this manner should be based on a comprehensive assessment of the electrical system and the potential need for future maintenance or servicing. Although the taps themselves may be unlikely to require attention, other components within the wireway, such as conductors or connectors, may still need periodic inspection or maintenance. Consider factors such as the wireway's environmental protection rating, the potential for moisture or dust accumulation, and the likelihood of physical damage from nearby activities. If there is a reasonable possibility of needing to access the wireway for any reason, ensure that the shelving arrangement allows for safe and convenient access. This may involve providing additional clearance around the shelving or using shelving units that can be easily moved or disassembled. Regularly inspect the wireway and surrounding area to identify any signs of potential problems such as corrosion, loose connections, or physical damage. Addressing these issues promptly can prevent more serious problems and minimize the need for extensive maintenance or repairs in the future. When performing any work on electrical equipment, always follow safe work practices and wear appropriate personal protective equipment such as gloves, safety glasses, and insulated tools. De-energize the circuit before beginning any work and verify that the circuit is de-energized using a reliable testing device. Never assume that a circuit is de-energized based solely on the position of a circuit breaker or disconnect switch. Always test to be sure. The National Electrical Code provides comprehensive guidelines for electrical installations, but it is essential to apply these guidelines with sound engineering judgment and a thorough understanding of the specific application. Consulting with qualified professionals and staying up to date in the latest code revisions are crucial for ensuring electrical safety and compliance. Let's delve deeper into the specific aspects of 110.26 and how they relate to the Wireway installation scenario. We've already established that 110.26 focuses on accessibility for maintenance, servicing, adjustment, and examination, while 110.26b addresses the arrangement of equipment to avoid hindering safe operation and maintenance. However, 110.26 includes additional subsections that further refine these requirements. For instance, 110.26c specifies the required working space in front of electrical equipment. This working space is determined by the voltage of the equipment and the presence of grounded surfaces or exposed live parts on the opposite side of the working space. While the wireway itself may not be considered equipment requiring frequent access, the disconnects that it feeds certainly do. Therefore, it's crucial to ensure that the working space in front of these disconnects meets the requirements of 110.26c. The depth of the working space is dictated by Table 110.26a, which considers the voltage to ground and the conditions present on the opposite side of the working space. Condition 1 applies when there are exposed live parts on one side and no grounded parts or grounded parts that are suitably guarded or insulated on the other side. Condition 2 applies when there are exposed live parts on one side and grounded parts on the other side. Condition 3 applies when there are exposed live parts on both sides of the working space. The voltage to ground is the voltage between the ungrounded conductor and ground. For example, in a 480 volt system, the voltage to ground is typically 277 volts. The working space must be clear and unobstructed for the entire depth and width required by 110.26c. This means that no equipment, storage, or other materials can be placed within the working space. Furthermore, 110.26d addresses the access and entrance to working space. This section requires that at least one entrance of sufficient area must be provided to give access to the working space without electrical equipment. The size of the entrance must be large enough to allow personnel to safely enter and exit the working space while carrying tools and equipment. If the electrical equipment is located in a dedicated room or enclosure, the entrance must be equipped with a door or gate that can be locked to prevent unauthorized access. 110.26e focuses on illumination. Adequate illumination is essential for safe and effective work in the vicinity of electrical equipment. This section requires that sufficient illumination be provided to permit safe and effective work. The specific level of illumination required depends on the type of work being performed and the ambient lighting conditions. In general, higher levels of illumination are needed for tasks that require fine detail or involve working with small components. 110.26f concerns dedicated equipment space. This section mandates that the space above and below electrical equipment must be kept clear of obstructions. No piping, ducts, or other equipment that is not related to the electrical equipment can be installed in this space. The purpose of this requirement is to prevent damage to the electrical equipment and to ensure that it can be accessed for maintenance and repairs without obstruction. In the case of the wireway installation behind shelving, this means that the space above and below the wireway must be kept clear of any items stored on the shelves. Now let's return to the specific question of whether the wireway installation behind shelving violates 110.26. Based on the analysis of the various subsections of 110.26, the installation appears to be compliant, provided that the following conditions are met. Firstly, the taps from the feeder to the disconnects are indeed unlikely to require maintenance or service, as justified by the factors mentioned earlier. Secondly, the shelving arrangement provides sufficient access for the safe operation and maintenance of other equipment in the area, as well as for any potential future needs related to the wireway itself. Thirdly, the working space in front of the disconnects meets the requirements of 110.26 CE, including the required depth, width, and clearance. Fourthly, the access and entrance to the working space comply with 110.26 D, providing a safe and convenient means of entering and exiting the area. Fifthly, adequate illumination is provided in accordance with 110.26e, ensuring safe and effective work in the vicinity of the electrical equipment. Sixthly, the dedicated equipment space above and below the wireway is kept clear of obstructions, as required by 110.26f. If all of these conditions are met, the wireway installation behind shelving would not be considered a violation of 110.26. However, it's important to remember that electrical codes are subject to interpretation and enforcement by local authorities. Therefore, it's always advisable to consult with a qualified electrical inspector or engineer to obtain a definitive opinion on the compliance of a specific installation. In addition to the NEC requirements, other factors may also influence the decision to install a wireway behind shelving. These factors include the available space, the layout of the warehouse, and the potential for future expansion or modifications to the electrical system. The decision should be based on a comprehensive assessment of all relevant factors, with the primary goal of ensuring electrical safety and compliance. While the wireway installation may be compliant with 110.26, it's important to consider the overall design and layout of the electrical system. Ensure that the wireway is properly supported and protected from physical damage. Use appropriate fittings and connectors to maintain the integrity of the wiring system. Label the wireway and its associated components to facilitate identification and maintenance. Conduct regular inspections of the electrical system to identify any potential problems early on. By taking these steps, you can help to ensure the long-term reliability and safety of the electrical system. Remember that electrical work should only be performed by qualified individuals who are familiar with the NEC and other applicable codes and regulations. Improper electrical work can be dangerous and can lead to property damage, injury, or even death. Always err on the side of caution and seek professional assistance when needed. The discussion so far has centered on the requirements of the National Electrical Code. However, it's important to acknowledge that other standards or regulations may also apply to the wireway installation. For example, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has regulations that address electrical safety in the workplace. These regulations may include requirements for lockout/tagout procedures, personal protective equipment, and training for electrical workers. Additionally, local building codes may have specific requirements for electrical installations in warehouses and other commercial buildings. These codes may address issues such as fire safety, accessibility for persons with disabilities, and energy efficiency. It's essential to be aware of all applicable standards and regulations and to ensure that the wireway installation complies with all of them. Consulting with qualified professionals can help to ensure compliance and avoid potential problems. Now, let's consider some best practices for installing wireways in general. These practices can help to ensure the long-term reliability and safety of the electrical system, regardless of the specific installation location. Firstly, select the appropriate type and size of wireway for the application. Wireways are available in a variety of materials, including steel, aluminum, and PVC. The choice of material depends on the environmental conditions and the specific requirements of the installation. The size of the wireway should be sufficient to accommodate the conductors and cables that will be installed within it, with adequate space for future expansion. Secondly, properly support the wireway to prevent sagging or damage. The support spacing should comply with the manufacturer's recommendations and the requirements of the NEC. Use appropriate hardware and fasteners to secure the wireway to the supporting structure. Thirdly, use appropriate fittings and connectors to maintain the integrity of the wiring system. The fittings and connectors should be compatible with the wireway material and the type of conductors and cables being used. Ensure that all connections are tight and secure to prevent loose connections and potential hazards. Fourthly, ground the wireway in accordance with the requirements of the NEC. Grounding helps to protect against electrical shock and to minimize the risk of fire. Use appropriate grounding conductors and connectors to ensure a reliable ground connection. Fifthly, label the wireway and its associated components to facilitate identification and maintenance. Use durable labels that are resistant to fading and damage. The label should clearly identify the purpose of the wireway and the circuits it serves. Sixthly, conduct regular inspections of the wireway and its associated components to identify any potential problems early on. Look for signs of corrosion, damage, or loose connections. Address any issues promptly to prevent more serious problems from developing. By following these best practices, you can help to ensure the long-term reliability and safety of wireway installations. In the specific case of the wireway installation behind shelving, it's important to consider the potential for physical damage from the shelving and its contents. Ensure that the wireway is protected from impact or abrasion. Consider using a protective barrier or guard to prevent damage from forklifts or other equipment. Also, be mindful of the potential for moisture or dust accumulation within the wireway. If the warehouse environment is humid or dusty, consider using a wireway with a higher environmental protection rating. This will help to prevent corrosion and ensure the long-term reliability of the electrical system. Finally, remember that electrical safety is paramount. Always follow safe work practices and wear appropriate personal protective equipment when working on electrical equipment. De-energize the circuit before beginning any work, and verify that the circuit is de-energized using a reliable testing device. Never assume that a circuit is de-energized based solely on the position of a circuit breaker or disconnect switch. In conclusion, the installation of a 6/6 metal wireway behind industrial warehouse-style open-back shelving is not necessarily a violation of 110.26, provided that certain conditions are met. These conditions include that the taps from the feeder to the disconnects are unlikely to require maintenance or service, the shelving arrangement provides sufficient access, the working space in front of the disconnects meets the requirements of 110.26c, the access and entrance to the working space comply with 110.26d, adequate illumination is provided, and the dedicated equipment space is kept clear of obstructions. However, it's always advisable to consult with a qualified electrical inspector or engineer to obtain a definitive opinion on the compliance of a specific installation. Additionally, be sure to follow best practices for wireway installation and to consider the potential for physical damage and environmental factors. By taking these steps, you can help to ensure the long-term reliability and safety of the electrical system.